So let's bring all of this back to the ethical principles that we have now that govern our research with human participants. We have codified these ethics. Before 1981, there weren't any laws about protecting human subjects in research. You could do pretty much anything you wanted to, as we've seen in these previous studies. There were some international codes, but they weren't laws, so they weren't very binding. However, these international codes came from the Nuremberg trials, in which many former Nazi officials were prosecuted for their crimes against humanity during World War II. And some of the language that came out of the Nuremberg Code as early as 1948 said, the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. And this was a response to the horrific experimentation that Nazis did on prisoners without their consent. Even though the international community was starting to adopt some of these standards, the United States still had no laws about it and were allowing American scientists to get away with similarly horrific things like the Tuskegee syphilis study that we talked about earlier. So now we have the Belmont Report that was created on April 18th, 1979 by the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. So we still didn't have laws yet, but we were moving towards that. And based on the Belmont Report, they started creating the first code of federal regulations for protection of human subjects in 1981. And this code articulated three basic ethical principles that are relevant to research involving human subjects. We have what's called respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. So we're going to talk about how we apply these three principles next. Respect for persons, we are going to enact that by requiring informed consent. Participants need to know that they are in a research study unless they are just already in public and you're observing their public behavior like we're going to do with our observational studies. But if participants have to do anything extra in your study that's more than just going about their normal business in public where people could already see them, we need to have informed consent. They need to know what the study is going to be about and be able to make a choice about it. And they need to be able to make that choice without being coerced by giant rewards that could be kind of seductive. They need to do it without being pressured in any way. They need to also have that information given to them in a way that they can understand. So if they are very young, if they're poorly educated, if they are developmentally disabled, they need the researcher to explain to them in terms that they would understand, not like a long terms and conditions legal document that really nobody understands except lawyers, right? Beneficence means that we are going to make a cost-benefit analysis. We're going to determine whether the amount of risk that we are putting participants under is outweighed by the potential benefits we could get from the study. So those potential benefits from Milgram's study did not outweigh the distress that he puts participants under. So he put participants under that distress of thinking they literally murdered somebody, and that did answer some research questions about authority and how people respond to authority, but that study could have answered some of those same questions without putting people at such great of risk. We're also interested in justice. We need a fair selection of participants. People need to have an equal opportunity to participate, and we need to not discriminate against potential participants unless we have a reason to study, for example, only Black participants because they primarily are going to be more at risk for sickle cell anemia. If we're studying some kind of phenomenon that happens in a certain population, then we can try to recruit only that population in our sample for our study. But unless we have some very compelling reason to do so, we need to have equal opportunities and not exclude any particular groups. And this one is necessary because traditionally women have been excluded from a lot of psychology and even biomedical research. And if you can imagine developing a drug that's based on only male bodies and then administering it to females, there might be side effects that were not anticipated, right? And we actually see this in developing a lot of new technologies. So virtual reality, the first virtual reality headset, I believe, that went on the market was the Oculus Rift, and it was mostly developed, tested only on men. And since they weren't developing it with women, they didn't realize until it started to go on the market that it tends to make many women very motion sick, like to the point where they can't even use it. So now they've created a product that's not fair, that not everybody can access equally because they weren't even testing it on everybody. So early in our research process, we want to include people in these types of research studies.